The digital transition. The Digital Transition, a podcast series created to assist those tasked with implementing digital strategies, where we will share our knowledge and experiences to support you in your transition. Welcome to the Digital Transition podcast number 31. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I'm talking to Stephen Hamil from NBS. Now, specifications are a critical piece of the information puzzle that's provided by the design consultants. It's provided to the contractors to enable pricing, ordering and building. Now, the process of creating specifications really hasn't changed a lot over the last 50 years, or has it? Now, before I talk to Stephen, I need to talk to you about our exclusive podcast sponsor, NBS. I'm excited to announce that for the second year in a row, NBS has signed on as our exclusive partner or sponsor for the Digital Transition podcast. Now, personally, I feel as an architect, one that has written a significant number of specifications in my career, that NBS, I feel, are actually kind of like the perfect sponsor for this podcast and everything that it stands for. It's about changing the ways in which we work traditionally. It's about embracing the opportunities that technology can provide us to deliver projects more efficiently, effectively, and hopefully with less mistakes. Now, I have to say less mistakes because otherwise my insurer won't cover me. But now, how does NBS actually do this? So their main product, NBS Chorus, provides architects and specifiers with a platform to write their specifications and connect it directly to their building information model. Now, this connected methodology reduces errors and conflicts whilst enabling more efficient specification of products, materials and construction systems as they are identified in the BIM. Now, to learn more about NBS, head over to their website www.thenbs.com.au. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today, Stephen.
Yeah, hi, Nathan.
Now, firstly, Stephen, for those that are not aware of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
In terms of myself, I've worked at an organisation called NBS now for about 22, 23 years. And I originally studied structural engineering at a university in the northeast of England called Durham. And I stayed on and did a PhD in sort of digitally modeling structures. So I used to build sort of reinforced concrete beams and columns, crush them in the lab, but at the same time on the computer, so Windows 3, Windows 95, we did sort of finite element analysis, sort of breaking down the structure so there was different properties for the steel and the concrete, and try to model digitally what we were doing in real life in the lab. And I really sort of got sucked into the computer side of engineering back then, and so I haven't looked back.
It's interesting seeing a structural engineer go into the specification space, but I guess we could probably learn more about that through our discussion today. But for the listeners that have listened over the last 12 months, they would have some understanding of what NBS does because of the sponsorship they've provided this podcast, and obviously the how well represented you are in events across the UK, Canada and Australia. But can you explain for the listeners that may not have listened to any of our podcasts before, some of the services that NBS actually provide?
Yeah, so at NBS we have two main customer types. We have those that specify, so architects, engineers, surveyors, and we also have construction product manufacturers that want to be specified. So we have two services essentially. One is called NBS Chorus, which is a cloud-based collaborative specification writing platform. And the other platform we have is called NBS Source. That's for construction product manufacturers to position their products and certification, literature, manuals, 3D objects in front of designers and specifiers. And the two platforms sort of link together. So when you're writing your specifications or when you're doing your design, if appropriate, you can select from the construction product manufacturer information we have. In Australia, the slight difference is we also have a specification consultancy business. So SCL Schumann is part of NBS, which means that construction professionals in Australia can choose to either write their own specifications using NBS Chorus, or for maybe larger, more complex jobs, work alongside the team at SCL Schumann to get expert help in that.
So that's that first side of it. But the other thing that isn't a product but a service that NBS has provided or keeps looking after is the Uniclass 2015 classification system. And we spoke to Sarah Delaney about the importance of classifications last year. So that's, not a product per se, but it's kind of almost like an industry service you're providing on top of the specification side of things.
Yeah, that's something we do for free for industry. And I think partly it's to make industry better and sort of work together, but also we need it essentially for ourselves as well. We need to build a structure, specifications, product information. So if there's going to be a structure out there, it's completely in our interest that we can sort of be round the table, sort of driving that. So for the last 20, if not 30 years, we've sort of chaired in the UK what's called the CPIC organisation. That slowly developed the classifications from the original Swedish and cross-European classifications through to the first versions of Uniclass. And then back in around sort of 2013, 14, the UK government wanted that pushed on because of their BIM initiatives. And they ran a competition where one organisation would really accelerate the development of Uniclass. And then, we were the company that won that. So for the last 5 or 6 years, we've first of all published Uniclass 2015, and then slowly worked with large client groups like Transport for London, Highways England, the different water authorities, Department for Education, and also client groups in Australia to keep on adding classifications to really grow its scope, not just for buildings, but for the country's built environment.
So for people here in Australia, just touching back on that, Uniclass 2015 is nominated in a number of government agency policies and documents here in Australia. But going back to the reason why I wanted to have a conversation with you today and going back to the whole concept of a digital transition. Now, here in Australia, as an architect, specifications are, I guess, one of the most important documents that are created during the design process. Now, people that are in the BIM sphere are very fixated on models at this stage, and they're not so excited about specifications. And I know that the process for most architects here in Australia, it hasn't changed. The specification is a separate document, and in some instances, the specification is created in complete isolation, sometimes created by an external party. This is always alongside a BIM process where people and practices are modelling their projects. Now, can you explain what NBS Chorus actually is and how it differs from this traditional specification so that we're removing this isolation or these kind of separable pieces where all of these, let's say, conflicts occur on regular bases?
Yeah, so the information that's extracted from a model, whether that's plans, sections, schedules, there's a mirror of that's in the specification. So if you've drawn a design for a wall system, in the specification, you're going to have all of the products that make up the wall. You're going to have the rules on execution because you want the tolerances, the accuracy, the weather conditions, and also the rules on system completion. So what sort of testing needs to take place, what sort of warranties are needed, maintenance information. And I think it's true around the world that designers love the design side more than the specification side. So if you go back to the 1970s, it was more fun on the drawing board than it was on the typewriter writing the specification. And that hasn't changed. But both are vitally important. And if you sort of just forget all about the specification, leave it at the last minute, or you just push it out and don't take care about it at all, you're going to be disappointed at the end of the project. You're going to visit your building and the products will be of lower quality. They won't have been built properly. Things won't have been checked. You won't have the certification. You won't have the manuals to pass on to the client because all you focused on is the geometry. So you've got to focus on both. Now, if both are a mirror of each other, it's essential that the information is coordinated. Because if it's not coordinated, you're going to be talking about one thing on the drawings and another thing in the specification. And that was hard to do in the olden days, in the 70s and the 80s, because you're going through thousands of drawings, you're going through thousands of pages of specification, and it's a really, really tough task. But with modern technology now, we can make that a lot more easier and lower the risk of things going wrong on projects, because you can digitally connect the objects in the 3D model with clauses, which are objects without geometry, essentially, in the specification. So as you're doing your design, you can see the specification on the right-hand side of the design tool, whether that's a tool like ArchiCAD or Revit. And that's true whether one person's doing everything, like a small practice doing the design and the spec, or you're a big multidisciplinary practice working with spec consultants where everybody's got different jobs. And if they're connected digitally, you can just click a button and you can do crash detection between the model and the spec. So when we talk about crash detection at conferences, 99% of the time it's clash between structural model and MEP model, or architectural model and structural model. But there's also clashes between the spec and whichever model it is. And that's possible now using the sort of technology that we've created here at NBS.
Now, I think that's a really positive statement you've made there about clash detection between the two pieces of information that typically we are engaged to provide. And I know, even through my experience, it 100% mirrors exactly what you're saying there about architects not having an interest in creating specifications. I've been fortunate that through the practice where I trained to learn how to write a specification and execute it and do it in a smart way to reduce those errors. But looking at what Chorus can do by being connected to a model where the model's smart already, it means that there's a less chance that you're going to miss things, because half the problems with specifications as well, and documents and models, if the documents are coming off a model, there's always a good chance that you're going to miss something. There's a good chance that you might forget to specify something that you may have drawn or modeled, and it's sitting there on a drawing, but it's got a descriptor there, but there's no execution at all. But so you're saying that the clashes that Chorus can pick up, not only pick up whether or not the specification that's in the written form is completely wrong for what has been executed in the model, but it also will pick up things that are missing.
Yeah. You can do a scan which will go through all of the different objects in your 3D model, and it'll say which ones have got associations with the specifications and which ones you've still yet to specify. And I think when we speak to customers, whether it's UK, Canada, Australia, they've all worked on projects, probably multiple projects, where there's a bit of conflict during the construction phase or a handover phase, and they've got regrets that they didn't spend more time getting the specification right, because that's the document that you can pull out and say, look, this is what we meant to do. This was the quality that we asked for. And if that's not documented as part of that contractual pack, you very often disappointed and things can go to dispute. So get the specification right and watch your project be more successful.
Now, I'm a big fan of actually commencing my specification process actually at the start of the design development phase here in Australia. Now, I don't know if that's the same terminology over in the UK with the RIBA stages of work, but essentially it's kind of just after you've finished your schematic design or your concept design phase, and that actually then informs the modelling. Rather than the modelling informing the specification, the decisions actually then inform how my team or I would model myself. Now, one thing we've talked about is the model being connected with the specification. Now, the one question other people would raise with regards to this would be, what about elements that are not modelled? So we know that there's a substantial portion of scope of services or scope of extent of work that would never be modelled. How's that handled in NBS Chorus?
Yeah, so maybe taking a simple example there, maybe a door set, where you have something that looks like a door in the model. You'd have some of the key properties like acoustic performance, fire performance, the main material of the leaf. But no one in the world models the intumescent strips and the fillers and the door closers and the door stops, really. But that's critical to the overall fire performance at the end, that the door closes correctly, for security it locks correctly, etc. So what we do in Chorus is allow you to link the objects. So you link the door set and the door leaf to the equivalent clauses in the spec. And then within the specification, you can have links. So within that door set system, the door set would link to the door closer products. It would be referenced to the particular hardware system. So in the specification, you can go into that detail with property sets, essentially sort of this property, this value, drop-down values, guidance with it, to specify all of the things that you wouldn't model in 3D. And the combination of the two together gives you that coordinated information set.
And I like the fact that it's connected to the elements that are modeled in some way, so that if you decide to change that, then it'll just disappear, essentially it'll drop out that other additional information, or it will, raise and highlight and say there's an issue here. Now, one of the things that here in Australia and in the UK, there's been several issues with constructed buildings. Obviously in the UK, we had Grenfell, which was devastating. Here in Australia, we've actually had a number of large apartment buildings structurally fail. I don't know how familiar you might be with those, Stephen, but there was a massive report done here in Australia about La Crosse, which was a design and construct contract where the structure essentially wasn't strong enough, and cracks and structural failures occurred. Now, from your perspective, and this might be the most intense question I might ask, and you might not have an answer for it, I don't know, but can a connected specification assist in preventing potential tragedies? And I know that we can only talk in generic terms here because we can't say it definitely will, but do you believe that these connected specifications could assist in preventing tragedies like what happened over in Grenfell? Could it actually contribute to the golden thread of information?
I think the most important thing there is to, first of all, detach technology from it and concentrate on information structures and process, whatever technology is used. And that's what the government are doing in the UK with their Building Safer Future initiative and the golden thread of information. So what they're saying is key gateways in construction projects of 7 stories or higher that are residential buildings, there will be sort of information drops. The first one is part of the planning system.
Yep.
Then prior to construction, gateway 2 is called prior to construction commencing. And then finally, gateway 3, prior to occupation occurring, where the regulator will go through a set of structured information. On the planning side, the government's already released a template which you can download from Gov UK, and it's a 6 or 7 page structured Word document with associated guidance where it's a little bit strategic. So which standards are you following for fire design? Can fire engines safely access the building? What about the standards for the sprinklers, for if you're going for sprinklers as a strategy for fire suppression, etc. And that's set and fixed and sort of signed off at planning. When you come to this gateway 2, that's when you need to have a collection of plans and specifications that are coordinated. Now, clearly to do that, you need to be using, I forget the terminology they use, but like appropriate technology, the duty holders that are accountable. And that's where you've really got to be using 3D modeling tools and have a sort of professional specification tool to coordinate everything together. And at that stage, whether you have contracted design portions or everything sort of traditional design, you need to have everything fully specified. So these are the products from these manufacturers. This is the quality of execution. This is the evidence in terms of the submittals. So prior to construction, and then importantly, between that gateway 2, prior to construction to final occupation, any changes have to go through that proper change control following the ISO 19650 standard in terms of suitability, revision, naming convention, etc. And I think one of the big things that we saw with the Grenfell tragedy was substitution of products without the correct process and accountability. So that needs set up before construction phase to say if any changes are going to be made, this is the process to make sure that the key technical properties are the same or higher, and that the systems that are connected also match the original design intent as well. So you're getting that transparency through a well-structured process and through well-structured information. So I wouldn't say it's the sort of first and foremost, use this technology and everything will be fine. It's follow this process, get your information structured, coordinate the information. And that's the process to follow. And then choose your technology to allow you to coordinate your model and your specification lower the risk of things going wrong and get the efficiencies that you can slowly develop that through and have that transparency. And I think you're right to raise the point that it's not just the fire safety side, it's the structural safety as well. I think you give the Australian example earlier. In the building press 2 or 3 weeks ago, there's a huge development in Hong Kong that's having to get taken down and rebuilt because they didn't get the concrete and steel right in terms of the foundations and the structure. And again, you get the documentation, understand the testing, make sure it's checked properly. If there's any substitutions to take place, make sure it follows the process. And that's what we've got to get right.
It's a scary thought, the volume of potential extra workload that'll actually add to a project in terms of checking off on things. Chorus obviously works well in obviously hitting gate 2 in the UK. The gate 1's a scary one in the sense that they just want a Word document that's kind of a template. It'd be nice to see some sort of smarts at the front end to do that, but then obviously with the phase 3, it would be, and I know there's heaps of conversations with, the likes, I spoke to GS1 here in Australia about, tracking products, onto sites and barcoding and all those sorts of fabulous ways in which things can be tracked. But it'd be good to see some sort of solution that kind of captures and holds, it's almost kind of single point of truth for the specification of a building, once it's built. And that's why I've always thought, even though you end up with these 500-page to 1,000-page PDFs, as evil as they are, there's so much information there that could be of assistance to an asset owner, only if it was easy to get their hands on. With regards to other downstream benefits, so we all know, and the kind of, what can I say, here in Australia, there's a common joke about the specification being essentially, a doorstop for the contractor on his site shed because it's so thick and heavy and he probably never reads it. But what are the benefits of this specification type that NBS Chorus puts together for downstream users, and how does it assist them in construction? Are there benefits for the construction team, for example?
The client, ultimately, especially if it's a client that does lots of similar buildings, whether that's supermarkets or hotels or car showrooms or what have you, if you're a university estates, if you're doing lots and lots of buildings, you want to be demanding in your sort of appointment documents, your employer's information requirements, etc., a record model and a record specification in a digital format of your choice at the end. So you're not just paying for a building, you're paying for that digital asset that goes with it. And on the modelling side, too many models that you see are just full of rubbish, get it right geometry-wise, generate your drawings, and you can't reliably query the information because the structure of every object is slightly different, using different GUIDs and different parameter names. And on the specification side, it's your 3,000-page PDF that gets printed out and put. Is a doorstop? Did you say?
Well, it's a doorstop when it's printed, but I'm sure it's just. I'm a big fan of digital waste as well. It's called digital waste when it's a PDF that no one ever opens.
Yeah. But if you structure the information properly, you can query that information, whether it's a model, whether it's a specification, and you can get the answers to your questions sort of very quickly. if that's not digital and it's physical, you can't. And then for those big clients that we started talking about at the start, you can actually then do searches across your estate. So I have 1,000 supermarkets across the UK, operating at different efficiencies. What's the heating system in that supermarket? What floor covering systems? Why did we have to replace that? And you can look across a digital record of your estate. And it's an area that NBS aren't in, but if you can take that information into the operations phase and slowly start to sort of put sensors and get that to report back, that's the sort of digital, slowly building up that sort of digital twin vision. And I guess we've always done that a little bit with things like security, CCTV cameras and fire alarms connected, etc. But can you do it on things like room occupancy and temperatures and when things fail, etc.? And I think that's the way it's going. But it all starts with getting your information structures right and your process right on the start of your projects.
So the key takeaway from that for our asset owners that are listening today would be to start to step back and have a think about how they may like a specification structured for them as an as-constructed specification to then assist them in their asset maintenance and whatever systems they may have in place. Just depending, even no matter how primitive their systems are, because here in Australia, there's a lot of primitive asset maintenance systems here, Stephen. So the maturity of the market is far behind some of the stuff the UK is trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think if you look back at the Golden Thread Initiative, you forget about the fire safety, but just look at the principles there. I'd like to have a specification in the following structure for construction. I'd like to have a change control procedure that I can follow as a client. I'd then like to have a record spec at the end in that structure. If you ask for sort of those three things, yes, it ticks the building safety box, but it also ticks all of the other important outcomes, whether that's sustainability, inclusive design, conservation. So it's picking off everything. And of course, the not the generic things, but the things that are specific to that owner. So how much can I sell the apartment for, or how many lecture theatres do I have, or prison cells, or whatever the metrics are for the specific client.
Oh, at this point in time, obviously, NBS Chorus is built off the back of Uniclass 2015. But for the listeners out there that might not be aware, and I think this is kind of something that could tie into the specification side of things, what are the differences between the standard information structures that are around the world?
You've got certain things that are almost the same around the world. So like the IFC data structure, the COBE data structure, and I think to an extent Uniclass 2015. And I think you can get away with all of those standardized around the world with maybe different sort of synonyms and language. So for example, we've got examples of Uniclass 2015 being used in Japan, different character sets completely. But the numbers are still the same. So a wash basin is the same in Japan in terms of its code as it is in the United Kingdom. And look, in North America, you might call the space a restroom, where we call it a toilet in the UK, but you can still have the same code. So the concept, if you like, is the same. But the terminology, we're not going to try and persuade everybody in the USA to call it a toilet and not a restroom, because that's not going to happen.
Or an Australian dunny.
Give me a good example of an Australian difference in the UK in language.
Oh, that's dunny. That's it. They're right there now.
Yeah, so we'll have the same code, but we're quite happy to keep the word toilet in the UK, and we'll go with dunny in Australia and restroom in USA. But I think it's the technical characteristics that are different. So there might be certain things that are important in Australia that aren't important in UK at all, like as a bushfire attack, probably vital. I know we've got specification properties in our Australian spec content, but we haven't got it at all in the UK. And then for just something as simple as the brick, they come in different sizes. In Australia, the standard size of a brick in clear brick in UK is different to Australia. And then the technical characteristics, like how it's tested in terms of its compressive strength or its geometrical tolerances, or the rules of measurement in the Australian standard are different to the British standards. So we got something like D1, D2, D3, or T1, T2, T3 for the tolerances. And I think we call it tolerances, and Australia call it dimensional deviance, and it's, I don't know, ABC or what have you. So once you get below the concept of what it is, the local standards have different technical characteristics. So it's a really big job to get those structures right in the different countries, whether that's Canada, UK, Australia, because the local standards are different. The challenge we have in Europe is the standards are very similar. They've got harmonized Euro norms. So the way that you test the tolerance of a brick is the same, but then the German language is different to the Spanish language, which is different to the French language, which is different to the English. So it's a slightly different, where you've got the same sort of enumerations and test standards, but you have a different. So trying to do a specification system around the world takes a lot of work from that sort of human technical knowledge side. And it's maybe why in the past you haven't just been able to pick up a tool and it works for everybody everywhere, because there's local differences that maybe aren't as important if you're just developing AutoCAD or SketchUp, where you're drawing geometry. But I think we've got a good handle on it. And I think from a construction product manufacturer side, it's, if you're shipping the same products from the same factory around the world, the information that you put on the labeling and essentially your digital information online is going to be different, because a cladding panel is going to get measured for fire safety different in Australia than it is in the UK than it is in Canada. So it's a big challenge for the manufacturers as well, those global manufacturers that export around the world.
It's a big challenge to even try and contemplate trying to, from my perspective, trying to understand what needs to be specified in another country. So I'll leave that to your team. I'll stick with the Australian side of things. Now, this is a kind of a step, obviously, to your other product, not Chorus, with regards to specification and manufacturer's content. And I frequently have manufacturers or suppliers here in Australia reach out to me to understand what industry needs are with regards to BIM, and a very strong focus at this point in time is all around BIM content. Whereas I think that there's from my perspective, it's more about the quality of structured information rather than a 3D model. But with your product here in Australia, and I see on all the social media services through NBS here in Australia, there's each week there's a few new manufacturers that jump on the NBS platform. What do you think from your perspective in terms of being a specification system and working closely with manufacturers, apart from the challenges of trying to have global systems in place so they can meet all of the standards in the countries they import or export into? How can manufacturers increase their chance of being specified on products or projects, if I could say it properly, instead of products and say projects?
Yeah, I think 6 or 7 years ago, the whole discussion here was around everybody needs 3D objects.
Yep, it's still here in Australia.
Job's done, go to the pub. That's the end of it. I think we've learned a lot in the last 6 or 7 years. We've done a lot of focus groups as well at the UK. And when we talk to designers and specifiers and say, like, what do you need? What's your message to construction product manufacturers? It's around like the key information that needs to be digitalized. And it's things like guidance on application. So it's an insulation product, but is it suitable for ceilings or walls or pitch roofs or flat roofs? It's around getting those consistent technical characteristics. So the standard is X, Y, these are the technical characteristics. Provide that in a well-structured form with the right units, etc. And then where you've got evidence of third-party certification. So I'm saying this is security level 3 to Australian standard 2, and I can prove it with this certifier that's actually smashed the door down with a hammer and proved that it does that got level. Linked information to PDFs, things like installation guides and warranties, and then really easy technical support contacts as well. So don't forget about the human side. So each manufacturer will have had somebody that's worked there for 25 years, that understands the do's and the don'ts and which products combine to give you that performance. Make it easy to talk and collaborate with that person as well. So some of the biggest manufacturers in the UK, we've got 40 or 50 of them now that subscribe to Chorus as well. So just like we're having a Teams or a Zoom session now, you can sort of click a button, get the manufacturer on a call and work together on the specification or work together on putting together the model and things. So yes, you've got to digitalize everything. You've got to have a great website, 3D objects help from many manufacturers, but think of the information that's attached to the website, to the objects as well. And I think that's pretty essential. And then get it out there in front of as many eyeballs as possible. So if you're selling, I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but if you're selling cars in UK, you've got a great car website, but you also put it on a website called Auto Trader, where everyone comes and compares different cars. If you're selling your house, estate agents have a website, and we have one called Rightmove. And I think it's the same in construction. You need a great website, but you also need to get your technical information out on the websites that the construction professionals are doing comparisons and discovering products. And I think that's what NBS Source brings to the table. It brings those standard structures and allows similar manufacturers to come together so that specifiers can discover them. I'm after a boiler, I'm after a hand dryer, I'm after a roof light, and you can look across the technical characteristics, the support they offer, the third-party certification, get permanent hyperlinks to each product, and then choose the product that's right for your project. So there's a lot to take in for construction product manufacturers, but get the information right, digitalize, and then make sure you get the eyeballs, get your products in front of the decision makers.
Well, hopefully that's something for our manufacturers today to take away. Now, this is an interesting pointed question I got for you, because I think it's one that I find contentious in many ways, because architects as a profession have watered down their responsibility over the last couple of decades, and it's probably the same in the UK. But for an Australian example, originally, if we go back even further, 1,000 years, architects originally were the structural engineers as well. So then we take a step back from that, and engineers came along, and I'm happy that engineers are around. I'd rather not take that responsibility. But then we lost ground to town planners. So as town planning requirements got more challenging, we lost out, and a new profession was born in town planners. Then along came project managers, because a number of architects couldn't manage their projects properly. So architects lost that. BIM's come along, and it's a great opportunity for architects to actually, I think, claw back and become the information managers and manage the procurement of both the physical and the digital asset. I think that's a perfect thing. But one of the things that we do see here in Australia is some people, as we said, some people don't actually like writing specifications. They'd rather focus on design. I personally like writing a specification because I'm a bit of a micromanager, and I like to make sure that the design is holistically covered. Now, what's your views on the concept of specifications and architects overall? Do you think that architects actually should be taking back that responsibility and focusing on that as being a really critical part of their role?
Yeah, I think the specifications define the quality of the products and the work. So the architects have to take responsibility for that. And I think the architects do have two choices, though. They can bring that skill in-house and use an expert system and sort of train their teams, or they can work with the likes of the SCL Schumann team to sort of to almost like give them the brief but then sign off at the end. So it's not like a sort of, if you haven't got the skills in-house, you might need that additional support. But ultimately, if you do need additional support, you still have to make sure the briefing's going in correct before the technical design stage, and then you're understanding what's in the specification and taking responsibility for sort of signing it off and really knowing what's happening there. It's I think in the UK, specifications are more done in-house, but there is 3 or 4 specification writing consultancies, and they'll be used, as I say, just to sort of increase the size of the project team but with the architect making sure the brief goes in correctly and then they sign it off at the end, or they're bringing in somebody to help build up their master so that they can stand on their own 2 feet in 1 or 2 years' time. But forgetting all about the specification, pushing it to one side and crossing your fingers that everything will be all right is a recipe for disaster.
No, that's good. I'm glad you agree with me, mate. I certainly do. Now, I kind of raised crazy ideas about the concept of, NBS's product being following the whole life cycle of an asset, and that's probably crazy from my part. But what's next for NBS? You know, you've got the products in place. You're the classification manager for Uniclass 2015. What else is on the roadmap for NBS?
I think from an Australian point of view, we've got a great development in progress at the moment, which helps the collaboration between the architect that is working with the spec writer. We call it the summary sheet. Very early on, you can go through all the things that need specified. You can share the brief. You can work together in the cloud and see that get developed. So we're really excited about the summary sheet functionality that we're working on right now. We're a national supporting partner of the AIA, and we're working with the AIA on BIM research and a report to be published later this year in Australia. And we also recently acquired the spec pack content set. That's maybe for slightly smaller projects, but again, it gives more options to the Australian market other than the NBS native content. But it's the content set that people have been using in the past, using Microsoft Word. On the sort of global point of view, NBS is now part of a group called the Big Factor Group. And that started as a European-wide group of companies, but now with NBS, we're now into North America and Australia. And we're hoping to be the biggest in the world in terms of sort of information management, insights, product information. So if you look at things like the design, there's 4 or 5 really big companies. If you look at things like the common data environments and collaboration, there's 4 or 5 really big global market leaders. There's no real market leader when it comes to that product information specification, project insight side. And we've now got a set of businesses across Europe, North America, Australia, that we're going to now pull together and make sure we get that data interoperability. So hopefully NBS, as part of the Big Factor Group, can be a real sort of global leader there.
Oh, I like that inspiration. It sounds like a good aspiration to have, because once again, having an international presence essentially it gives you more buying power essentially to then strengthen your product line, because your customer base is broader, so you can invest in your products more and deliver greater value for your customers.
Yeah, and some of our really large customers, now you've seen lots of acquisitions and partnerships, and they are not just operating in the UK, but in Canada, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa. And you don't want to be sending your project team, okay, you use Word for the documentation, you use Revit for the designs, you use whatever common data environment, and everywhere in the world you do something different in terms of the spec information. You want to have that one single package so that the business leaders know they've got the efficiencies, they can lower risk, and they can look across all of those projects and get that sort of dashboard report of where things are at in their different projects around the world.
No, it sounds good. Now, Stephen, thank you very much for your time today. Now, I have one final question, one that I ask all of my guests. What does BIM mean to you? And I'm looking forward to this one.
I'll try and keep it concise as well. So, for me, it's about the information management side of BIM. So I think it's a mix of two things. It's about getting the process right, getting your information structures right. This allows for collaboration. And if you throw the digital bit in, which has always been my passion from university all the way through, you make everything fly. Process information, collaborate together, get it right digitally, and that's BIM.
Oh, you can line up with me then and call it better information management. But thank you once again for your time today, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Been a pleasure to chat.
Now, for more information on Stephen and NBS and their Chorus product, please head over to the podcast section on the Skewed website for some further reading. Now, I look forward to sharing a next podcast with you in a fortnight's time. Until then, good luck with your digital transition. digital transition.